let's just look at the American church, what the American church is doing, because there's been a lot of church movements. The American church has changed, right? I grew up in a small church, Methodist church, and we had, I don't know, 100 people at that time sang hymns, right? And then when I went to college, they started singing, right? They had the rock bands, right? And then you're starting to listen to, Awesome God and, Michael W. Smith and these concerts. So that started to become a movement. And I was like, man, this is really, really cool. But a lot of people didn't like that movement, right? And then now it's in every church, right? And I've seen a lot of the smaller churches start to die out, just like business. A lot of the big churches come in, start planting churches, and the smaller church start dying out because they can't afford it. They don't have some of the ministries that the bigger churches can afford, like the kids ministries, things like that. So now we're kind of this movement where it's a lot of big churches, right? And the smaller churches are starting to die out as far as the American church and the buildings. And I just want to dive into just what do you think is happening now? This is kind of a new thing. You started talking about this. I've heard a couple other people talk about it, but is this, do you think that this is just where this movement is going to be? It's like going away from the mega churches too? And talk to us about what you're actually doing, right? Because what is the American church doing versus, how are they growing so much? 10 million people. What's going on? How do they do the multiplication?
Yeah. So I would say, first of all, Brett, too, this conversation would have been a lot different pre-COVID than post-COVID.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm talking to a lot of pastors that, Brett, even if they're wanting to continue down the traditional path, they recognize there will be a new normal in the American church.
Mm-hmm.
What that looks like, nobody knows for sure. But I've heard lots of people say they just don't think it's going to return to exactly the way it was before. Brett, I actually think that will be healthy for the American church because I think it will purify the American church. But do I think that there will still be large traditional churches and small traditional churches and all that? I absolutely think so. And I would say when we use the word movement, Brett, we use it a little bit differently than some might use it. So like you described, going from one type of music to another or something, more like a movement based on preferences. Your preferences change, what you like. The way we're actually defining, and if people read the book, they'll see this movement has to do with measuring multiplication. So hymns to Michael W. Smith really is no indication of if you're more effective at accomplishing your mission. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Or a more traditional looking building to a more contemporary looking building or whatever. Those kind of quote movements would be a little different than what we're talking about, which are miraculous multiplication movements, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
One of the people, Brett, that's out there right now that's popularizing just maybe a critique of the American church and its difficulty in multiplying is a guy by the name of Francis Chan.
Mm-hmm.
Some of your listeners may know who that is. And he, similar to us, Brett, went overseas, saw some things in the underground church, I believe in China and in India, that when he came back to his megachurch, he just thought, I'm not sure if I can do this anymore now that I've seen what I've seen and seen what God is doing. So he tells his story in a book called Letters to the Church, which I would also recommend to your audience. But he just talked, and then he started a decentralized house church network, I believe in California, and he's since moved to Hong Kong. But anyways, I do think, Brett, to your point, there is a number of pastors that are saying, hey, we're not against what we've done. In fact, like I'm saying, Brett, I loved our first 10 years. I'm for it. Thank you, Jesus. It's awesome. Brett, we're just acknowledging its addition. So we were a very large church, but Brett, we were, not hardly reaching our city, much less our region or our state or our nation that so desperately needs Jesus, because we're growing one by one as people bring their friends to church. Brett, again, I'm not disparaging that. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. That is not the same thing, though, as multiplying disciples. It's not the same thing. If you look in Acts 19, it talks about how in a 2-year period, everybody in the province of Asia heard the word of the Lord. And they, scholars estimate that was about 15 million people. That doesn't happen by addition.
Yeah.
What we're seeing in Africa and in India and in China, it only happens by multiplication. What do we mean by multiplication? A church starts a church that starts a church that starts a church. And then another stream of churches start churches. Disciples make disciples, kind of like Acts 4, where John and Peter are ordinary, unschooled men, but they knew they had been with Jesus, Brett. and they couldn't stop them because they said, we won't stop speaking about what we've seen and heard. That results in multiplication. I don't hear many people in the American church saying things like that, but we should be saying things like that. As we read the book of Acts, we should go, we want to see this. And in Acts chapter 6, Brett, it talks about how the number of disciples was increasing rapidly. Why? Because there was some famous preacher in a building that everybody came and listened to? No, because people were going and telling their friends, and their friends were, people in the church were empowered. Ephesians 4, the pastors and apostles and the evangelists and the teachers, the prophets, they use their gifts to equip the people for ministry, right? That's what it says in Ephesians 4. I don't know that happens a lot in our context as much. That's what's supposed to be happening. It's not that you don't pay the pastor, you don't tithe, and so the pastors do the work of the ministry. Everybody's supposed to do the work of the ministry. Everybody owns the Great Commission. We're all out there making disciples that multiply. And Brett, I think when that happens, we'll see far more people come to know Jesus than just the addition, even that big churches are seeing, which, Brett, again, I'm saying is not bad. What they're seeing overseas, Brett, is Acts 4. Ordinary men and women that are saved by Jesus, that go to all of their oikos, which is a Greek word meaning like your network, all of their family, friends, coworkers, neighbors, and they cannot stop speaking about what they've seen and heard.
Yeah.
Brett, that starts to multiply the gospel in such a way that a multiplication movement starts, and a whole area is saturated with the gospel in a short period of time, right? So there's a guy I know in Africa, also a traditional pastor, so had a nice traditional church, but ever since he started multiplying disciples like the Great Commission in the last 10 years, they've seen 1 million people come to Christ. So Brett, but an American pastor has trouble understanding that, because it's not that the American pastor or the African pastor preaches to 1 million people, right? And they come to Christ. It's not like that.
Exactly.
That's addition. That's addition.
Yeah.
It's not bad, but it's not multiplication. Right. Multiplication is you make a disciple and they make a disciple and they make a disciple. That's multiplication. That's what the Great Commission is talking about. And Brett, I just think that's more uncommon in the North American context, but it's not uncommon around the world. And my challenge to pastors, Brett, constantly, I talk to pastors all the time. My challenge to them is humble yourself and learn from what God is doing around the world. Humble yourself and learn from our missionary friends and our African and Chinese and Indian friends and what God's doing there. Let's learn from them. What are they? Why are they seeing these things? Why is God at work in these ways? And let's see how he's at work in our country and join him in what he's doing, and make sure we don't have a lot of barriers, Brett, to multiplication. I think in America, we create barriers that keep us from multiplying. And I think our Indian and Chinese and African brothers and sisters could help us remove some of those.
Exactly. So I want to just kind of hit home a lot of, the thing that really hits home to me is the early church talking about just an ordinary man and woman, right? And it's exactly, so, to multiply, these aren't big churches, right? Especially when you think about the American church, we got the building or meeting in the skating rink, or, you got a pastor up there and you're raising money, things like that. But these other countries, number one, they don't probably have a lot of money, right? They don't have buildings, and they're just ordinary men and women just having a church. What's the size of a normal church, right? That someone's leading?
So it really depends on the context, Brett, and how heavy the persecution is. The heavier the persecution, the smaller it is. But I believe on average right now, a church like what I'm talking about around the world is around 20. Sometimes it can be more like 12 if it's heavy persecution. And again, that's the average. Victor, my friend that I told you about in India, the average church in their movement of 10 plus million baptized believers is around 50. But Brett, they're not small because they couldn't be big. They could be huge. They're small because they want to multiply. Yeah. You know what I mean? Brett, think about this. This blows pastors' minds when I share this. And there's studies on this. The average cost per baptism in the American church is $1.5 million.
Wow.
If you take all the money all of our churches spend on buildings and staff salaries and programs and all that and divide it by our number of baptisms, Brett, 1.5 million. Guess what the cost per baptism is in the movement I was telling you about in India? 66 cents. So Brett, how many people are we going to reach when our cost per baptism is 1.5 million? I mean, it's kind of should make us sick. It should make American pastors sick, like myself, because I've contributed to this. And that, I don't think that's what Jesus meant in Matthew 28. Hey, go make disciples. It's going to cost you $1 million each. Yeah. It doesn't even make sense. No. You know what I mean? And so I would say, Brett, in our network of churches now, we encourage them to not outgrow the size of a house or something. So we don't say you need to be 10 or 20. But the church I was a part of in Lubbock, one of our churches was like 36, including children. Just, Brett, small enough so that you can do the functions of the church in Acts 2, 1 Corinthians 12, 1 Corinthians 14. These passages, they encourage a smaller atmosphere because different people are using their spiritual gifts and so on. They're able to eat together, that kind of thing. Brett, that was harder for us to do with 1,000 people in the room. When there's 1,000 people in the room, I use my gift.
Yeah.
The worship guy uses his gift, or lady uses her gift, but everybody else just kind of sits and watches us.
Yeah.
It's just not exactly what 1 Corinthians 14 was modeling for us.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you so much for checking out the Brett Snodgrass channel. If you like this video, please slam on that like button. And if you really like it, then subscribe to our channel here. And remember to leave us a comment below, and I'm going to try my hardest to reply to all the comments. Thank you guys so much. This is why I do what I do. Every single week, I come out with content that focuses on success, freedom, and living out your purpose. Thank you guys so much. See you next time.